If you're ready, we'll gather back together for our last session. Lights are bad. So our last session for this morning is around the Ministry Study Commission. I am Kim Ingram. I'm the Director of Ministerial Services and the Conference Secretary in the Western North Carolina Annual Conference and a member of the Ministry Study Commission. And so the three of us are going to present today some of where we are with ministry study, but also with the hopes that we can get feedback from you. The ministry study was established by the 2012 General Conference for this current quadrennium, but as most of you know, we've been doing ministry study commissions for as long as John Wesley has been, since he's been around, I think. In this particular conversation, there are 24 participants, and they do represent the local church, the annual conference, seminaries. There are staff members from the General Board of Discipleship and the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry. It includes laity, local pastors, elders, deacons, and bishops. So many constituencies are represented. There are members from all 5 U.S. jurisdictions and 1 representative from the Central Conference. And Bishop Hagia is the chairperson of this Ministry Study Commission. And we were charged with the following issues that the previous commission had decided needed some continuing work. And they included the nature and grounding of the elder, the nature and grounding of the variety of lay ministries, course of study and education for local pastors, the status of associate membership, education of clergy, including seminary reform, curriculum, global theological education, funding, and debt of seminary graduates, and the current accountability structure of United Methodist Theological Schools, including the University Synod and the Commission on Theological Education. So no small task. And so in organizing the commission, it was decided there would be 3 subgroups that would tackle these different areas, and they included theological education, the nature of the elder, and issues related to the local pastor. So today we're just going to share with you some of the conversations that we've been having as we've begun to meet together. At this point, no decisions have been made. Each of us is going to present from the areas that we've been working on, and our goal this morning is to get feedback from you to contribute to these conversations. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to make a presentation, have you talk about it around your table and give you some topics for conversation to have. But we'd like you to appoint a recorder at your table because we know that we're on a limited time frame and that your conversations will be much richer than what we're going to have time for you to share back with us through the whole group. So we would like you to find a recorder at your table who, when you have conversations, can take notes. And then we're going to ask you to email those notes to us so that we can share them with the ministry study as we continue these conversations. There will be a brief time for conversation among the whole group, but if we can have your detailed conversation, you will email it to events@gbhem.org, and we'll share that with you again, but it's events@gbhem.org. It's the same email that you've gotten communication about this event from. So today our presenters, we're all on the Ministry Study Commission. Tom Choi, who you met yesterday, will go first. You'll remember he's the DS in Hawaii, the job we don't want to be the DS, we just want to live in Hawaii. Second will be David Bard. You'll remember as you just met him earlier this morning from Minnesota. And then we'll have conversation around tables, and then finally I'll speak at the end and we'll have further conversations. Now at the very end of our time together, we're going to spend a few minutes for you to have an opportunity to give us feedback around what you had hoped the ministry study would discuss or what you had thought the ministry study would discuss that we're not going to mention or that we don't mention today that hasn't seemed to be a part of our conversation, because we have a couple of more meetings around which we can continue these conversations, so we want to hear back from you. So Tom's going to get us started.
All right. Aloha. Aloha. Thank you, those of you in the faithful remnant. I am representing the subgroup on the nature and grounding of the elder, and I give thanks to our wonderful chairperson, Dr. Mary Elizabeth Moore of Boston University Theological Seminary. I'm just going to share kind of briefly. I'm going to go as fast as I can because we want to get as much time for you to talk and feedback, and because we really want to hear from you what you think of our beginning work and where you think we should be going. So in this particular subgroup on the nature and grounding of the elder, our present recommendations to the church are more robust lifelong learning and group mentoring, stronger support and guidance for lifelong supervision, consideration of earlier ordination or at least shortening the process, and more clarity on the relationship between ordination and the sacraments. So we have a couple of proposals that we're working on. The first one is strengthening the requirement for lifelong learning and coaching. And we propose that the word should in the first sentence of paragraph 351.2 should be changed to shall to ensure that clergy are actively engaging in lifelong learning and coaching, and that the paragraph would read, a clergy member's continuing education and spiritual growth program shall include such leaves of at least 1 week each year and at least 1 month of 1 year of every quadrennium. We are recommending that we have covenant groups at all stages of ministry. Remember John Wesley I was talking about? Yeah, so we currently don't have it really mandated. We really want to encourage at every stage of ministry, because once you get past your full connection stage, sometimes people feel, that's it, okay, no more covenant groups. So we want to encourage that. Proposal 2, periodic assessments of clergy. And I think this comes out in part because I know that one of the things that we worked on at the 2012 General Conference is the ministry study proposed the elimination of security of appointment, and that did pass at General Conference, and it was struck down by the Judicial Council, in my opinion, haphazardly, but okay. I don't think, or the ministry study does not think that that's going to be something that we're going to be pursuing for this quadrennium as far as legislation that we're proposing. But I think one of the concerns about it is, then what do you do about clergy? We had the questions yesterday during the other thing I was a part of. And so the Ministry Study Commission proposes that every 8 years, every clergy person shall also engage in a 6-month process of personal and professional assessment and development. This process will be designed and implemented by the Cabinet, the Board of Ordained Ministry, in consultation with the orders chairs. So, and building from this first reflection, the Ministry Study Commission proposes that every 8 years, every clergy person shall have an in-depth review of his ministry by the Cabinet and Board of Ordained Ministry. Now, next are some things that we want to hear from you about. Specific things we haven't really formed a lot, but we're thinking about a lot, is the reconsidering the length of the ordination process. We have several of the younger clergy in our group, and they just feel that this is something that all the clergy, younger clergy, are really young and ready to go ones say, we need to shorten the process, and also the entrepreneurial types that we've been talking about. So we want to hear from you what that means. When we proposed at the last ministry study earlier ordination, the strongest kickback that we got, pushback we got, was from boards of ordained ministries. So we want to hear from you whether you still think that way, and just where you think we can kind of balance between getting in really top quality clergy and also understanding that we have some constrictions in our discipline. And then finally, clarifying the relation between ordination and sacraments. Those of you who are in case study number 2 in groups 1 through 20, we were struggling with that person who was going for elder's ordination or commissioning, but was told she should be a deacon, but she wanted to be a hospital chaplain, she wanted to do sacraments, but you should be a deacon, but I need to do sacraments, and then local pastors can, So that whole thing about what is the meaning of ordination in relation to the sacraments, and how our whole ministry is rooted in baptism, our calling as laity, as clergy and local pastors, and the administration of sacraments.
Well, thanks, Tom. I chair the subcommittee that has been dealing with issues around theological education. The issues around debt were also a part of our original subcommittee agenda, but the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry has a team that's been working on that. We've had some good consultation with them and didn't want to try to duplicate their efforts. In fact, we knew we wouldn't even be able to do that, so they're working on that separate from us. So we've really focused on issues around theological education. These are really challenging times for the church. We talk about adaptive challenges, and if you know the language of adaptive challenge, it means that people have to learn both even to define the problem as well as to try to figure out what some of the responses to the problem might be. And our temptation is often to reduce our responses to technical solutions. You know, if we only tweak this paragraph in the book of discipline or do this, make this change, everything will be better. We can't avoid trying to look at those kinds of things, but I think we also need to be open to those unique ideas and to the fact that, you know, we're working in challenging times and we don't have easy answers to the challenges that are before us. Our team has come up with some ideas about what we think the leadership needs for the church in the 21st century are. There are things you've heard about this week. We need leaders who have spiritual depth, a vibrant relationship with God and Jesus Christ, sense of call into ministry. We think they need to be intellectually grounded in disciplines like Scripture, theology, systematic theology, practical theology, historical theology. They need to be intellectually nimble. That is, they need a broad understanding of history, the traditions of other religions, science, humanistic disciplines. There's so much information out there, and it's not that the church has to respond to all of it all the time, but the church can't simply bury its head and ignore the broader conversations that are going on in the culture. Social and emotional intelligence, strong skills and tasks of ministry, including good communication skills, skills for adaptive leadership, including skills in conflict transformation and leading change. So how do we form these superstar folks, among which are all of you, obviously? But what can we do to help make that happen? There's no guarantees, but what are some of the things we might do that help form people in the ways we want to form them? So here are some of the, I would call them soft proposals. We don't have this legislatively right now, but we'd really like your feedback on some of these ideas, and I have three. Our group also talked about the periodic reviews, and Tom did a really nice job about talking about where we're headed with that. So one of the things we're looking at, you know, there's a tension between wanting people to have strong intellectual grounding and a recognition that simply training in academic disciplines does not train a person fully for ordained ministry. So one of the things that's come before our group is the possibility that a Master of Divinity degree would not be an absolute requirement for ordination as an elder. That may be one of the more controversial things that we've been discussing. So for example, here's a scenario that we thought about. Somebody with an MBA or a master's degree in counseling who would do additional theological work as well as field work in a particular area, could that person be eligible for ordination? Another proposal that we were looking at was the elimination of the age requirement for local pastors to use an alternate route towards ordination. Currently, the age requirement is 40. So if you're over age 40, you can pursue course of study, an advanced course of study, and move towards ordination. What might it look like if we were to eliminate that age? And then look at what's a part of course of study at this point. You all have, because I've heard some of the conversations, received, or many of you received a letter from the University Senate in July. The Study and Ministry Commission received that same letter at the same time. And so we have not had a meeting since then, but it was an invitation to conversation from the University Senate about requiring candidates for ordained ministry to spend at least 1 year in one of the United Methodist seminaries or Asbury. I can tell you, listening to the conversations, I'm not hearing a great deal of enthusiasm for that idea. That may be even, I guess that's an understatement. But I want to make sure that I am hearing well, because when the commission meets in October, Tom Wolf, who is the chair of the University Senate, is going to be meeting with us, and I would like to be able to communicate to him very clearly what it is we have been hearing here. While the idea originated with the University Senate, there have been a few people on the Study and Ministry Commission who've also brought this to me and said, I think your committee ought to think about it. So your feedback on that is really important. I do want to say, one of the problems that policy change is trying to address, in addition to the sense that we want our students trained and formed in a United Methodist ethos, is that the Commission on Theological Education, which I served on last quadrennium, often has to work with limited information about non-United Methodist seminaries. And at times it is difficult and frustrating work to try to evaluate non-United Methodist seminaries. I'm not saying that that's a reason for the policy change, but that's, I'm sure, a part of what's going on. If you were to eliminate, if you were to allow people to attend seminary wherever during part of those years, knowing that they would attend a United Methodist seminary one year, it would eliminate that task of the University Senate. So, I don't want us to simply think that this is something that they haven't given a lot of thought to. Doesn't mean it's a good policy change, but I trust that they really have been grappling with that. But if you do have some different feelings about that, or want to reiterate your less than enthusiastic feelings about that, we do want to hear more about that. Thank you.
So what we would invite you to do now is around your tables to have conversations around the two things that David and Tom, or the things that David and Tom have presented to you. You'll have until about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 minutes. And as we asked, if you'll have a recorder to make some of those notes that you can email to us later, because we won't have time to hear from everybody from the floor when we gather back together in a few minutes. Thank you.
All right, friends, let's gather back together. I'm going to invite you to go to the mics. There are mics. There's at least one here. Is there another one over there?
There's one there.
I don't know. Oh, there's one over there. So if one of you could, who is brave enough to go to the mic and just share about some of the feedback you'd like to give us from what you've heard on the things that David and I have shared. You love everything that we do, I know.
There's one over here, and then one over here.
There we go. Okay.
I'm Kip Gills from the Texas Annual Conference, and one of the things we discussed was all the discussion we've had about the number of shalls that already exist. Adding any of them seem to be counterproductive. And if there are shoulds as recommendations that help to establish norms, is there another way to do that without making it a resolution in the Book of Discipline? So that we might look at the GBHEM communicating with boards, a board aid ministry.
Okay, thank you.
Our table echoed that concern. I'm Carol Bruce, board chair in Texas. We don't think you can legislate excellence or courage. And although we have a large number from Texas here, I really tried this whole time. I've so enjoyed going to other tables intentionally. And we have a very geographical, diverse table here. And across the board, I'm hearing the same thing. No more shalls. How can we move away from that and make mays? So we have more opportunity to be to educate people and release these awesome young people who are ready for our settings to meet the needs and to lead the future of our church. I'm very opposed to the idea that the University Senate brought up, and I voiced that in other settings, but all the board chairs I've talked to, I haven't found anyone who is in favor of requiring our incoming candidates to go to the University Senate, to go to a United Methodist school. And in fact, I think that's 180 degrees opposite of where we needed to be going as a church. And I was really happy to hear the options for education, that we might actually have equivalencies even for a Master of Divinity, that we can open up. In our conference, we have a desperate need for certified lay ministers, part-time local pastors. Even in the Houston area, we're going to have fewer and fewer and fewer elders. We're spending a lot of time talking about a very few people and very little time opening us up to the flexibility to meet the needs of our current and future United Methodist in Texas. So
Okay.
really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Very much consistently with what Carol was saying, the concern with the mandates, I'll come to that in a second. University Senate, with Carol, I would say I haven't heard anybody that thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, and I haven't either, so.
And
I
it kind of
appreciate
goes
hearing it
against
again.
any kind of intellectual and academic integrity to say that we've cornered the market on truth. That's another story, and I can talk about that one for a long time. But on the covenant groups, the idea of mandatory covenant groups, I also think I have concern about that in part because of the shall, and also in part because it's not consistent with the research that shows that mandatory participation in a covenant group is not a productive effort. Participation in a self-selected group where the group has agency does have effectiveness and can be transformational, but the transformational piece is the agency of the participants. And when we change the language to mandatory, then we compromise that and we create something that is a bureaucratic headache for the cabinet, and it is not productive in gaining the results that we seek.
Okay, let me just take a quick poll by voice, if you could, because I think a lot of the, I apologize, the shall language really kind of dominated the thoughts of folks, because there was two parts of that. There was the mandatory groups, but there was also the 8-year review and assessment, which is, I think, to me, the more valuable piece. Did you all think that that was a good thing, the 8-year review and assessment? No. Lift your hand if you say yes, you like that. And then, all right, thank you. And lift the hand if you don't like that. Okay, the ayes have, no, I don't know. Okay, it's a divided house. Okay, thank you. We really only have time for really,
Do one at each mic.
okay, we'll do one at each mic. And we'll also have about maybe a couple minutes at the end to allow for more folks. So we'll go here and then there, okay?
I'll go very brief. I'm Brett Opolinski from the Florida Annual Conference, and I would just say in all of this, I think one of the things that I would want to be concerned about is to make sure that our pastors continually are grounded in our Wesleyan theology. And I think we have to be really, really careful of that, our Wesleyan distinctives, and any changes that we make within our educational structure. I think we want to make sure that we are well grounded in our Wesleyan theology.
Okay, great, thanks. The last 7 words or so.
Nancy Lambert, Great Plains Conference. In light of the response from the Texas conference and about having fewer elders and more local pastors, I would just raise the issue that's the same as what we'll have in our conference. Is there any conversation about creating this local elder that we've heard about this week as an alternative to that? So.
Yeah, I think we're really seriously going to be talking about that. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, that is bubbling up from a lot of places, including our commission. Okay, I think we're going to turn it over to Kim for her part.
Yeah, I just, one of the things I guess I'm hearing, whenever General Conference authorizes a study commission, there's almost an internal pressure to produce legislation. And I guess what I'm hearing from all of you is you wouldn't be all that disappointed if we didn't produce reams of legislation. Is that a fairly accurate? Thank you.
So I want to spend a moment talking about the third subgroup, which I chaired, and it related to the local pastor. And I will start by saying that we have affirmed from the beginning and throughout the importance and need for local pastors in our denomination and the many churches that would not be served were it not for our part-time and full-time local pastors. I want to give you a little bit of a history of how our conversation has gone and where we've ended up. we have discussed the components that seem to uniquely contribute toward the effectiveness of a local pastor. And those include licensing school, which GBHEM provides the guidelines for, but annual conferences develop and implement. The course of study, which GBHEM coordinates and is offered through the seminaries, either through the regional extension or satellite programs. Then you have the District Committee on Ministry Accountability, that annual meeting that the local pastor has to do with the DCOM each year. And that's kind of a more local thing. Annual conferences determine what that looks like and trains the Board of Ordained Ministry trains DCOMs on how to do that. And then there's the component of local pastor mentoring. And that's required by the Book of Discipline, but it's developed and implemented at the annual conference level. So another thing we considered is what it would look like to sort of have parallel structures for elders and local pastors who at the end, or for whom will be resulting in preparation to serve in a local church or local churches. And so when you look at the elder, you have sort of 5 or 6 years in the preparation phase before you come into full connection. And that includes either 3 or 4 years of a Master's of Divinity typically, and either 2 or 3 years of residency, depending on how the annual conference does that. And it contributes toward their education, their mentoring, and their accountability. In that 5 or 6 year time frame, those things are encompassed. So we talked about, so what does that look like in a parallel sort of structure for local pastors? Now, granted, 5 is about the minimum for that, and then you might have up to 12 years, depending on how long it takes to finish course of study, when that education and accountability piece happens most intensely for local pastors. And it happens at the same time. Unlike for elders, usually it's the MDiv and then the residency program with a mentoring component. For local pastors, it happens consecutively while you're in course of study and you're being mentored at the same time. And so in looking at the educational component, we talked about course of study a good bit, but we decided that it already provides a strong academic and theological preparation for local pastors. That we did a lot of surveying of local pastors, got a lot of feedback from local pastors for whom had really positive experiences in their course of study. That GBHEM is already spending a lot of time and effort and conversation around course of study in improving accessibility through access, through satellite programs and starting online classes starting in January. And that the curriculum has just been reviewed and revised and is being implemented in the next year. So essentially, while we know there's always continual improvement that can be done in the educational processes of local pastors, we feel like attention's already been given to that, and that it's already a good foundational for local pastors. So the other primary component for consideration seems to be the local pastor mentoring, where accountability, the practical training, and the effectiveness comes into play. And so we looked at how to parallel local pastor mentoring with the residency period when the mentoring happens for people in preparation to become elders and of course deacons. And we know that a lot of conferences have spent a lot of time on improving their residency programs and strengthening their residency programs. And we think that maybe we can learn from that and what it means for local pastors. So we felt like the greatest impact for local pastors would be through some attention to local pastor mentoring. And the other thing that contributed to our conversation is that, 2012, the General Conference implemented group mentoring for the candidacy process and strongly recommended, and many annual conferences have gone to that and speak very highly of how their group mentoring through the candidacy program is going. So we felt like maybe suggesting a group model for local pastor mentoring might be the way to go. And that's where we are in the conversation right now. We recognize that there would be challenges in local pastor mentoring that differ from candidacy mentoring in that it's a much longer time frame that we're talking about this mentoring is going to happen over. Geography creates a problem for that, getting groups together when annual conferences and districts are spread out geographically. And local pastors do move, and so it would require reconstituting of groups every year to some degree, which is different from the group candidacy mentoring, which doesn't necessarily have all of those challenges. But we think the benefits would outweigh the challenges, that if you have group local pastor mentoring, you'll have fewer mentors. And when you have fewer mentors, you can provide better training, you can have more consistency among those mentors and mentoring processes. If you need fewer people to do the mentoring, then you can find people who are more passionate about it, that really feel called to it, and for whom are willing to spend the time and energy on it, that are better suited for the role. And it would just be easier to track and simplify if you have a simplified mentoring program. So right now, our momentum has been around local pastor mentoring. And when we ask for your table conversation in a minute, the kinds of things that we'd like for you to discuss are, what do you think about local pastor group mentoring? I know there are some conferences that are already doing it, so maybe some reporting on how it's working and how it's going well, or whether you like that as your model. What else had you hoped we would talk about related to local pastors that I haven't mentioned? And then we haven't really had much conversation around associate membership. So if that's something that you feel like it's important for the ministry study to consider, have some conversation around what that would look like, or what about associate members you'd like for us to discuss. But before you start your table conversations, I need to present one other conversation that we've been having in our subgroup, and that's about the certified lay members. It's come up, or certified lay ministers. It's come up in a number of different settings this week. It's paragraph 271 in the Book of Discipline, and if you read paragraph 271, which we did in our subgroup, what you read is that it really is a lay supply for serving churches. Now, we do understand, having had many conversations with different people around CLMs, that it's being used in a variety of ways, that it's not being exclusively used as supply for a pastoral role in a local church. But if it is being used as it is described in the Book of Discipline, then we have had the discussion that it's hard to distinguish a CLM from a local pastor in function. We do recognize that the training is different, the accountability is different, and we understand that the call feels different for the people in those roles, but it feels to us like the function is the same. And so we have had just some difficult conversations around whether something needs to change regarding the CLM, but maybe some work needs to be done around that and on that paragraph. So some things related to the CLM for you to think about and provide feedback is, how are they being used in your annual conferences? What if the CLM were required to move toward licensing in some certain time frame? What if it was a temporary status, so to speak, and that after some period of time they'd need to move forward toward licensing? What adjustments might you recommend in the Book of Discipline to make it a more relevant and useful status? And the other thing we've talked a lot about is with so many different choices in lay training and certification options, does it diminish the laity, the call of all laity to serve through their baptism? So when we have all these different kind of specialized roles for laity, or certified opportunities for laity, what does that mean for the person who just wants to serve the church out of a call from their baptism? So these are the things that we would like for you to have some conversation around your tables, and if you could just take maybe 5 to 7 minutes to have that conversation. We only have a few minutes left for this session, so we want to take a minute to hear from a couple of you about the conversations you've had at your table around local pastors and certified lay ministers. If there's anyone that's willing to share. You're so excited about your conversations, you don't want to stop. Okay, we have somebody at this microphone right here.
Lamar Oliver from the Louisiana Conference. One of the things, and you hit on it when you said about the CLMs being looked at in a supply role, is maybe putting into discipline some language about what's the maximum amount of time someone can be appointed in the CLM role in the TBS before they have to make a decision on whether or not they are going to pursue the licensed local pastor ministry. Because cabinet, sometimes when you get toward the end of the appointment string, if they've got somebody who's a CLM and they can leave them there for 3 or 4 years and nobody's going to care about it, you're telling our local pastors, hey, you can do pretty much everything, and you don't have to go to Millsaps 4 times a year, or you don't have to go to Candler or Emory. And so you're causing issues with our established local pastors. And as far as the group mentoring, given that so much of the proper mentor relationship is contextual to one person's ministry and their setting, you get some people in a group. We have some brothers and sisters who are gifted with the gift of gab, and we have some who are not. And so when you put them in a group, if the point of the clergy mentoring is to be a resource, and you get 8 people sitting around the room and 2 of them dominated, then have we really provided any mentoring to the local pastor there? Thank you.
Thank you for that
you.
feedback.
Janet Craswell from Baltimore, Washington. We had some differences of opinion at our table, which is geographically very diverse. The CLMs are very effective in some of the, especially rural areas and the larger annual conferences where there's a lot of geographical spread. Our experience in Baltimore, Washington is that they've been mostly deployed in ethnic churches that do have elders or licensed local pastors present. Some concern that there's some dangers in deploying some of the CLMs into churches without adequate training around boundary issues, and that needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. The one thing, despite the differences that we have in our different annual conferences around CLMs, we did seem to have some agreement around the idea that this feels like a turf battle between GBOD and GBHEM, and it would be useful if y'all could work that out.
That's helpful. We're going to take just a minute. If we have a couple of people we could hear from at the microphones, and then we invite anybody to email it. But anything that you thought of today that you had thought the ministry study would address and did not, or had hoped the ministry study would address and has not, or you haven't heard here today? Any thoughts about that?
Gregory Walter from the Memphis Conference. Just 2 things. I really was of a mind and really hope the CLM will be more towards a resourcing of the local church and not as a preparatory to the other. We've got the other supply and that sort of thing in place. And more to the point, I wish we would reclaim the language of steward. I wish we could find the right current place where steward starts describing the work we do at all kinds of levels. So,
Thank
steward.
you.
Hi, I'm Susie Horner, and I'm with the Florida Conference, and I am a local pastor. So I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for looking into this and taking local pastors into consideration. I think the idea of the mentoring process is excellent. When you spoke of the parallel with the RIM groups for the provisional elders and creating something to parallel that for the local pastors, that is definitely needed. Because so often as a local pastor, you're placed into a church and it just ends. And you're left to sink or swim. You don't have that resource to go to. So I applaud your effort for looking at creating that mentoring process for local pastors. Speaking to the idea of the mentoring or the groups where you have 1 or 2 people who may be more vocal or stronger personalities, that's where it is very important to get good facilitators or mentors to lead those groups, because you're always going to have that in any group. There's going to be that person who's going to try to dominate. Good mentors, and they're there. And whether that mentor is an elder in full connection or whether that mentor is a full-time local pastor, it doesn't matter, as long as whoever the mentor is respects the call of a local pastor. That is vitally important. And I want to go back to speak on something dealing with course of study and the lowering of the age for course of study. My concern is if you have somebody who is 20 or 30 years old who wants to go through course of study for whatever reason, currently, if you complete basic course of study, you can become the full-time local pastor. To go on to advanced course of study, you have to have basic course of study and a bachelor's degree. Correct?
I believe so.
Yes. You
Yes.
have to. Yes. So, if you have this 20 or 30-year-old who goes into course of study and then says, you know what, I'm going to go on to advanced course of study, but they don't have that bachelor's degree, are we now saying that the basic course of study is going to take the place of that bachelor's degree? Or are you going to have them complete basic course of study and advanced course of study in the expectation of becoming an elder in full connection, and then coming before DCOM or the board who says, wait, you're missing a very important component, and that's an undergraduate degree? So I'm concerned about that.
Thank you.
That needs to be very, very clear if we make that kind of a switch. But I, again, applaud you for making that switch. I, for one, have a youth pastor in my church who wants to go on to become a pastor but cannot afford to go to seminary. But with the way it stands now with course of study, he's not eligible to do that either.
Right.
So thank you
Thank
for the
you.
steps that you're taking.
I'm going to do another one of my quick polls. I just want to ask you about the early ordination thing. Early ordination would be, I'm just going to ask you about at the time of commissioning, which would actually put us in line with other mainline denominations. So I just want to ask you, so if you'd lift the hand, if you would be open to considering ordination at the time of commissioning, would you lift the hand? Okay, I'll give you another chance. No. And how many of you would be opposed to that? Okay, great. I would really love if you could email events at gbhem.org and really let us know about that, or any of the stuff that we're talking about, because really want to hear why. Because the word from the younger clergy and some of the entrepreneurial types is, gosh, we want to be ordained at that time. Okay. Yes, that would. And one of the questions is ordination ontologically a lifelong thing, or is it not?
Could I just ask quickly on that? I was ordained a deacon in 1997, so I know that's part of our history, but when you make a blanket quick statement about alignment with other denominations, as you're talking about this, that kind of information would be very helpful to know what is it about the ordination commissioning process, both where we're at now and what's being looked at. How would that help us to be in alignment? For some of us who are in territories where ecumenical relationships and cross appointments are a very serious and growing thing, that is a piece of the conversation.
Okay. Add that to your email, Cammie.
And I wanted to say one quick thing. When I was commenting about the commission looking at making more flexible some of the educational requirements, the way I stated it was that we were looking particularly at the Master of Divinity degree, which is obviously moving towards elders' orders. While we've spent more time looking at the educational requirements for elders, we recognize that when we look at making those more flexible, we will also be looking at educational requirements for deacons. We're not forgetting that. Our focus, our charge was really to more look at elders' materials, but we recognize that we want to keep things, make parallel changes if we make changes. So didn't want you to think that that was not being considered.
So we thank you for your time and feedback. The ministry study meets again the last week of October. So if you could send any feedback, either from your groups around your tables, or if you have further conversation with your boards of ordained ministry and they want to offer feedback, or with your cabinet, please try to get that feedback to us by the middle of November. Meg has been taking notes. You have the email address to use to give us the feedback electronically, and we will get all that compiled and brought to the ministry study at the end of October. So thank you so much for that.